It's time for another episode of Guys Talk Knives. And it's like an episode you've never seen before. We're actually going to do a little bit of a feature because we have a special guest. Jason Herrington is up here from Dallas, Georgia. He is one of our great members of the SMKW Army, and he volunteered. This has been months in the works, right? Months ago, he called in, he wrote in, he said, I will come and teach you how to sharpen because I am terrible at sharpening. I've tried to pick it up a little bit, but Jason is here today.
You do have a good strop.
I do have a good strop because it was given to me. Jason is going to take us all the way through this entire process of sharpening. But, first, the real question that I have to ask is, why do we need to learn to sharpen?
So there's a couple different reasons.
Okay.
So first off, buying a knife and saying, I'm not going to learn how to sharpen this, I'm not going to sharpen it, it's kind of like buying, there we go, I wasn't going to say it, but it's kind of like buying a car and saying, I'm not going to put gas in it. So you'll have a product that will do what you want it to do for a certain amount of time, and then it won't do that anymore. And it's also safety. So if you're trying to cut something, if you have a dull knife, you're putting a lot of force into it.
Right.
And then when it finally goes through, that force is probably going to go through.
I have done that so many times where that jump is the most frightening feeling in the world.
Especially if you're doing what you shouldn't do and you're cutting towards yourself, which you never want to do.
Right.
So with a sharper knife, you're putting less force into the cut, and it's safer for you to use the blade.
Okay.
And especially depending on what you're cutting, you'll get nice, cleaner cuts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
But let's just say you don't want to learn how to sharpen. There are alternatives.
I spent most of my life as somebody who just didn't want to do it. I've gotten into it recently, inspired by you handing me a strop and feeling how sharp your knife was.
Yep.
I said, I'm going to go through this store, I'm going to find some things, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to watch some YouTube videos.
Yep.
And now that you volunteered, I can actually watch this video and, come back to it and figure it out. But so what are some alternatives? If you didn't want to sharpen, what do you have to do?
Box cutter. You could always just go with a box cutter because it's replace the blade.
Right.
But let's say you do want to have a folding knife. There are folding knives where you can either replace the whole blade or, much like a box cutter, there's an insert that goes into it. So that's really your main alternatives. Right. Or depending on what company you buy from, and just go to the website and check it out. A lot of them have, for example, I've used Benchmade Life Sharp, which is where you send it in not just to get sharpened, but they also
clean it.
Well, I had a 580 Benchmade, and after 7 years of carry, it's still open and closed, assisted, but you could tell it was getting a little worn after 7 years. Yeah, exactly. Sent it in, got it back in 2 or 3 weeks, and it was like a new knife.
Oh, wow.
And the only charge I paid for that, for Benchmade at least, was sending it in.
Right.
Yeah, great.
So I know Buck will do the same thing for you, and I'm pretty sure Case will do the same thing for you. Some of them have charges that go along with that, but a lot of our different knife manufacturers will sharpen that knife for it and clean it up and make sure that it works right if you send it back under warranty.
Because they're looking after their product.
Absolutely, and that's always great. Okay. So here's the other thing. What the heck are we going to talk about today?
So what I want to kind of go through, and I know for a lot of the people who are watching this, some of this is going to be a repeat of what they already know.
Right.
But for someone who just bought their first knife, what's the shape of your knife blade? What's the edge profile? Which there's a couple of different ones, and depending on how it's shaped, that changes how you sharpen it. What tools do you need to accomplish what you want to do in sharpening? I want to get it sharp.
Right.
You go to a knife store and there's 1,000 different products. Which one do I need for what would be best for me?
Right.
And then last, we're actually going to do a demo.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. You're actually going to get something nice and sharp for us.
Yes.
Awesome.
But we're going to try.
Okay, so you mentioned blade shape first. Take us through this. Tell us what we need to know about blade shape.
Okay, so for typical blades, if you'll pick up the Glock.
Which is this.
Yep. You're going to have a straight edge and a tip. And straight knives, the straight edge, that's the easiest to learn to sharpen on.
Right.
If you're going to get, let's say I want to learn to sharpen, go get a couple of Rough Riders that have a straight edge like that.
Right.
And I would not go that big. I would go, pocket knife size.
Right.
3-inch blade, 4-inch blade, something like that.
Right.
The straight edge is going to be the easiest for you to sharpen with.
Right.
Then when you start getting a little bit more complicated, my favorite, you get recurves, which is where the blade curves. And there's curves right there.
So do you know what else I noticed that is like this recurve in sharpening? Because, I went on that little journey of mine trying to figure out what to do, and I found you're going to show us a sharpening system that is very much like a Lansky. It's called a Wicked Edge. I tried the Lansky. I wasn't as comfortable with that. I actually found it more therapeutic to use stones and try to hold my own angle. But I found a knife that was very much like a recurve, except it's the 0460 and the 0462 have that long upswept blade, so it's very different from sharpening the spay blade on a trapper.
Well, excellent lead in there. Okay. What's the secret to sharpening a knife?
I have no idea, Jason. If I did, we wouldn't be having
There's
this
two
episode.
parts.
Okay.
And this is, I'm bestowing the knowledge.
Please do.
The two secrets to sharpening a knife is keeping the exact angle you want between the abrasive and the edge of the knife.
Right.
And as that blade shape changed, and we'll talk about this in a bit, how you're going to hold the knife against the stone changes.
Right.
And the second thing is taking away the amount of metal you want to take away.
Right.
And those two things sound very simple.
And they're not.
And they're not.
No.
And that's why most of the different sharpeners you'll find, which we're going to talk about a couple,
Okay.
those two things are really what they're helping you for.
Right.
Is keeping the angle.
Right.
And yeah, they don't really help you know how much metal to take away. You need to know how to do that.
Right.
But those are really, if you're approaching sharpening and thinking, this is really hard, two simple things.
Right.
Keep the angle, only remove what you want to remove.
And I think that's the hardest part with it, for me at least. And I think your system sharpeners do it much better, and I'm sure we're going to get into that. But on the stone itself, that was the hardest part for me.
Yes.
When you approach a difficult blade, and you're like, okay, well, I made that stroke nice, but why isn't this part of this blade shape? Why didn't I remove the metal from this?
Exactly.
That blade.
Exactly.
So.
And one more thing.
Sure.
Let's say I have the stone, and I've got my nice angle with the blade. If I do one pass of a really rough stone where my angle's too high, everything you just worked on is gone.
Yes, and I noticed that with the stone, as I'm working it and I'm doing some nice passes with it, I would hit a point where I got complacent. I've done 15 strokes on each side. I get to 14 on the last one, and I let it jump and I let it slap one time in the middle.
The last time I got complacent, I have a nice line on the tip of my finger right here, and it was 3 stitches to close it up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the trick here is pay attention to what you're doing while you're sharpening as well.
Yes.
Because if you get them as sharp as this guy does, you're gonna put some holes in your hands.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about edge profiles.
Okay, so I got some drawings.
Okay.
Just to kind of illustrate this, because it wouldn't be too good holding up the knife.
See that.
So you have a couple of different standard shapes, and we're going to go through a couple. We're really only demoing how to sharpen 1 or 2 of these.
Sure.
But this is called Scandi. And what Scandi means is there's literally one bevel. So any flat surface you have on the knife like this, that's called a bevel.
Right.
You literally have one bevel on each side, and it goes to a point.
Okay.
And I have it on this drawing at least going all the way back up. If you'll pick up the Mora.
Okay.
Moras are Scandi for most of them. I think they have a couple that are
And so what
now.
we're showing is actually that a little bit of an angle.
Yep.
Right there.
But there's from wherever the blade stops being rectangular, there's one angle or one face of metal that goes all the way to the tip. And that's Scandi.
And the Scandi can happen on, is it Scandi if it happens only on one side, or is that chisel?
That'll be chisel.
Okay.
Which is actually the next one.
Okay, nice. So let's look at
Yep.
that.
So chisel. And this is,
Show your fancy drawings in the floor.
yes. And also one thing, what these blade shapes are used for. Scandi, a lot of woodworking tools, bushcrafting tools. Yeah.
Yeah, the Puko that is so popular right now is a full Scandi grind, and those were traditional Finnish work knives. So they're going out to the fishing nets and that kind of stuff, and using a Puko that is a Scandi grind to cut into those things.
Yep. So chisel.
Nice.
Scandi on one side, flat on the other.
Okay.
And the auto is an
The
example
auto.
of that.
Jason's trying to kill me here.
It's a
giving me
left-handed auto.
Left-handed auto.
I say it's correct-handed.
It's correct-handed. It is correct-handed. It's different from where I normally have it.
So one side of the blade is literally like as if you got a flat
So
piece of metal.
I'm showing the flat side right
Yeah.
here, and then on the other side,
you have
you
your
can see
bevel.
the grind. Yeah, I see. And so I wonder, are most Tantos like that? You think? I don't know. I'm not positive. I think
you
some
can do
of
it
your
either
modern ones are on both sides at this point.
way. Yeah.
I look at the sharpness of your blade and go, I'm going to kill myself with it.
Eventually, yes.
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 It's going to bite me.
Now, well, thankfully, I don't have an example of this.
No hollow ground.
No hollow ground. So this is hollow ground, which basically means that instead of there being a flat face, it actually dips into the edge and comes to a tip. When I think of this, straight razor.
Yes.
That's what comes to mind.
Yes.
Because you can get these extremely sharp.
Right.
And another nice thing about these, you'd almost sharpen this about like we're going to do another one of the grinds.
Yeah.
But because it's so thin, you'll actually get more life out of the blade.
Ah.
As you sharpen it back more and more and more, you have a very thin profile, so it keeps being sharp.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you're not having to drive anything thick through it. What's this?
Convex. So convex means there isn't really a flat. And this could start convexing here, it could start convexing all the way at the top, but basically it means you have a gradual slope going down to the point. And where you'll see this is hatchets, axes. I have a tomahawk that has it. This is also used on knives. I would say not as much.
No, I'm seeing in my mind the old Marvel's Ideal had this. And with a deep, what is the fulcrum? Yeah, the blood groove. I'm losing my words here. But anyhow, yeah, the old marbles had that very much as a concrete.
Yep, and that's the tomahawk. But what you get out of this is a lot of strength. When you hit something with this,
right.
The arch is the most powerful shape or most shock absorbing shape in nature. So instead of it being on a flat face where you start getting dulling, it's together.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Although again, these, you can get a knife blade, depending on the thickness of the knife, sharp to where I'm like shaving hair with a convex, but it's a little bit harder in my experience versus what we're going into now. This is probably the most popular, and this is saber or dual bevel. And with this, you have a primary bevel just like you did with Scandi, but at the very end, and you can just barely see it here, you have another bevel that's a higher angle.
Right.
So you have two bevels, one after another.
So you could potentially reset that bottom bevel again and again and again with this kind of grind.
But now one point to look at this though is what I was saying with the hollow ground is that if you think of when you're sharpening, you're going to keep sharpening that secondary bevel here.
Right.
That's really the only part you're sharpening.
Right.
Let's say you sharpen it all the way back up to here. You've used the knife for years.
Yes.
You now have a very thick tip.
Right.
That's where you'd have to go in and actually redo the primary bevel.
Right.
Which can be hard, and then do a new secondary bevel on that.
That makes sense.
Yep.
That makes sense.
And an example of that is the Glock.
The Glock. Right. So you've got on this Glock.
It's actually nice. You can see the black bevel there. That's the primary. And then if you tilt it a little bit more, you can see the secondary.
Yep. And that is pretty much what we see almost every modern folder, besides the Scandi grinds that are out there.
Yeah, that is pretty much the most popular. And then one other thing to look at on this is, depending on the thickness of your blade, we have, I call it the paradox of the edge.
Okay.
So the tighter you make that angle to be very, very thin, like the hollow ground, you can get it extremely sharp.
Okay.
It's really sharp.
Right.
For a couple of cuts, and then it dulls out.
Right.
Or you get an axe, which is very strong.
Right. So I'm not going to slice this paper with that. I'm going to get it sharp on the edge, but then I can't push it through.
Right.
As easily as something that finds the right angle.
Right.
Okay.
So that's kind of what you have to think about when you're sharpening these. And then, of course, we have serrated edges that are out there. I'm not a huge fan.
I am not at all.
I think...
But John is.
Yeah, John is. But to me, bread, meat, and rope. That's the three big things.
Right.
So like if you
and somebody will throw tomatoes in that list as well.
Yeah. So if you look at the Spyderco Matriarch, the one made for, I think it was women's self-defense in South Africa.
Right.
It was a hooked blade that's serrated.
Yeah.
And it's made for cutting meat. Yeah, basically. And it's very effective at that.
Right.
But for a standard use knife, I just don't use them that much.
Right. And it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about edge angles. We've looked at the different blade shapes and profile shapes. Let's talk about edge angles. Did we just talk about
That is that.
Okay.
The profiles.
Okay.
Yeah.
See?
So you have edge shape, so the recurve versus the
Yeah,
straight.
yeah.
Then you have all the different drawings on the floor.
So I don't know if we're going to get into it in just a minute or not. And my question though is, and I do this a lot. You talked a little bit about being too steep of an angle. What is your average angle?
Average about 20 on each side.
Okay. Because that's really where I was headed with that.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the biggest mistake that I made first on the stone. I was going at too steep of an angle rather than finding that nice 20 degrees, which is what? That's probably 20 right there.
About. And one way it was described to me, and I really like this, is imagine you had a block of chocolate, and that's the stone. And what you're trying to do is shave so that you don't just shave a piece off, but you get a curl.
Right.
So it curls up. So
Okay.
you're kind of in enough that it's going to bite and keep lifting material up, but not so shallow.
Drive a
that it's just
chunk
gonna-
out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
That's great advice. We're going to take a little bit of a break right here. You're watching Guys Talk Knives. This is a special episode with Jason Lefty Herrington. He's teaching us how to sharpen and all the little ins and outs. And when we come back, we're going to get way more into this. We'll be right back. We're back with Jason Herrington. We're going to get into the next part of this. And I think we're going to talk about sharpening versus honing. Is that
Sharpening
right?
versus honing. Yeah.
So, okay, lay it out there. What's going on?
Okay, so when I go to sharpen a knife, there's really one of two cases it's falling under.
Okay.
Either one, I have a knife that I don't like the angle that came with it, or I tried to carve a statue out of concrete and it's just
Right.
really killed the edge. And that's when you need to sharpen the knife. And sharpening, as I define it, is removing metal to get the shape back to how
Okay.
you want it. So like the drawings that we showed last time, if your knife angle
Right.
looked something like this, you no longer have
Okay, I'm
a
gonna hold
nice
this right here.
Oh.
So if you're right here and you've got a round tip.
round tip. That's not sharp. So that
Get
would
a
be
ballpoint pen.
yes, that would be the point where you're going to sharpen.
Okay.
Yeah. So first thing to sharpening is gross removal of steel.
Okay.
And there's a couple of different ways you can do that.
Okay.
First, and probably the most simplest, is just a rough stone.
Okay.
And kind of like we talked about a little while ago, what's the secret to sharpening?
You can't put me on the spot like this, Jason.
Keep the angle.
Oh, keep the angle.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's keeping the angle the same throughout the entire length of the blade, whether that's curved or not.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's kind of like, what's the secret to dieting?
Eating less and watching your calories and making sure.
And exercising.
Exactly.
And how many gimmicks are there on the market for dieting versus just...
I see where you're going
Yeah.
now. I see where
So
you're going.
there's all kind of different options you have for what you want to use to sharpen.
Okay.
And the most basic is loose stone.
So I've actually watched this. I have watched, in a pinch, somebody sharpen on a stone out of the creek.
Yep.
They find a good flat stone, they find one that's rough, or they find a certain type of stone, and they basically sharpen up their knife right there.
You can fine polish on window glass
Wow.
for just getting that very fine edge, which we'll talk about later.
Okay.
I've seen people do sharpening on cast iron skillets
Right?
to sharpen their knife.
Right?
Really, anything that's going to remove the metal, you can sharpen on.
Okay.
If you try it on tapioca pudding, it's probably not going to work that well because it's not going to remove
Exactly.
metal. But when you're thinking about that, how rough something is. So here I have a rough stone and a fine stone.
Right.
Say you're driving in a car and you have a line on the road that you want to get to.
Right?
Well, if you're a mile away, do you want to get there at 2 miles per hour? That'd be really
Right.
slow. So you wouldn't want to use just a fine stone to get to that point.
Right.
Would you want to jam the gas all the way down, all the way till you're at the line, then slam on the brakes and try to catch it right where you want it?
Right.
You wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
So there's a progression of stones, just like sanding wood.
Right.
You
Right,
wouldn't
right.
start with the rough. You wouldn't start with the finest sandpaper on
Right.
rough wood because
Right.
you're not going to do anything.
Right.
But you can't get to the super fine edge without going from rough, medium, fine, so on and
Okay.
so forth. So first thing, stones. And like we talked about, this is already very sharp, so I'm not actually going to touch the stone with it. But
Jason's knives are all extraordinarily sharp.
yeah, it'll shave. But when you're finding the edge, there's a couple of different ways that you can find the edge. If you have a piece of wood,
Right.
hand me that one, you can take the knife, start it on the piece of wood, and slowly start, and it's actually peeling the wood up.
Right.
Slowly start raising the angle of the knife, and then the position where it bites
It bites in. That's your angle.
that's where you want to stop your angle.
Right.
And so I start here, the knife is flat, I'm just slowly bringing it up, and right there it catches in.
Right.
You can also do this on your thumbnail. You're maybe going to cut your thumb if you do that. So that gives you an idea of the angle.
Right.
Now, the second thing is, as you're running along the stone, imagine a line coming straight out of the edge. So it's like this. So notice as it goes down, that line suddenly changes.
Right, it radiates.
Right.
Yes.
And that line is how you want this edge touching the stone.
Okay.
That's why when we talked about it earlier, a nice flat blade
Right.
is much easier to sharpen at all.
Right.
I'm not even going to say for a novice versus
Right.
an expert, but it's easier to sharpen than something that has a recurve where it has a lot of weird geometry.
So show me on this blade curve how that stays. If you go forward with your stroke.
So if I'm going forward, I'd be sweeping down, and notice I'm starting to pull the knife back so that still wherever that
Right.
line is coming out, that's going down the stone. So from here I'd go.
So what do you see novices do on a regular basis? That and I think I had the same exact problem. Well, even with the curve, I'm not going to touch your blade to it, but as I came through, I would just keep. I mean, I'm trying to make the curve through, but I did not get the full movement that you had.
If you start seeing that, the bevel, like we were talking about, the shiny part at the edge,
Right.
You'll see that not being consistent all the way through the knife.
Right. And I would notice on certain knives, as I've tried that, I would have like super scratches on the fine and then one smooth portion left. Like even in that edge, that wide edge, I would see it happen
Yes.
that way.
And again, it comes down to keeping that. Imagine the imaginary line coming
Yep.
off.
Show us that stroke again.
So from here, imaginary life is still straight, and now I'm do it here. Now I'm moving the knife so that if I imagine that straight line, so here at the
Right.
very end,
Right.
it should be pointing right like that.
Right.
Down
And does
here.
it help you to do that on the stone itself to keep that pressure point against the stone? Or so in my mind, I was watching you do that, and you kept that curve almost dead center to the stone.
Practice.
Yeah.
And that's the best thing.
Yeah.
Go get a couple of Rough Riders, something like that. And if you want to go plain stone, the only way you can learn it is doing it.
Yeah.
And then seeing what results you get out.
And I think as I did it, and this is the way I prefer to do it, and you're going to show us another way that is really, really good, another way that I did not particularly like to do, and maybe I'm just not good at it. But I would find that once you found it, right? So once you figured out what that stroke should be and you see an actual result, I think it's just like exercising, like we were just
Yes.
talking about, and losing weight. Once you see a result, it's like, light bulb
You've
goes
lost
off.
the first 10 pounds.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
that's
Now I
it.
can get back in a pair of my old pants. I don't look great, but
Yes.
I know what the stroke should be. I know what the exercise should be.
Exactly. And then notice on both sides, and this is the thing, I'm left-handed.
Yeah.
I do this stroke very easily.
Right.
And I'm going to.
I'm exactly this. I have.
If I come back with the other side, it's awkward.
Yes.
Or I switch over to my other hand.
Right.
And guess what? I'm going to do it differently with that
Yes.
hand. Just
Yes.
no matter what I try to
Yes.
do, it's not going to be exactly
Yes.
the same.
And so if I'm doing this and I'm working on the stone, I'm sitting here, I'm going here, and I'm doing the pressure through, and then I make that flip. You're exactly right. This hand is not as steady as my good hand.
Yep.
Coming back through. So that's my.
And now here's the other biggest thing. Well, two big things.
Right.
The worst thing you can do, especially on the really rough stones, is that I have this nice edge, and then you'll see people at the very end go like that. And
You just ruined all your work.
yeah, as soon as you raise the angle,
Right.
you're taking off that fine point of the edge that you've been putting on.
So not to get into too much detail, let's
Yep.
get into some other things. But
Yep.
I know that you're going to tell us how many kind of strokes and what you're looking for in between each step. But we start off rough.
Yep.
We go to fine.
Yep.
And there are lots and steps in between. And this is one way to do it. There are other ways to do this.
Well,
as
now this is the thing. You're really, as far as the stones, or really as far as anything else you're doing the exact same movement.
Sure.
The stroke is exactly the same. What's changing is when, just like doing wood. So let's say you have a rough
how
piece
much
of wood.
material you're taking off.
How much material you're taking off, and really what you're doing is getting rid of the scratches of the rougher abrasive that you just did.
Okay.
So the case where you want to be very careful, and what we're going to talk about next is not a good use case for them,
Okay.
is if you're doing it with a really rough abrasive or you have a very dull knife, you want to use the rough abrasive to very quickly get to your edge shape,
Right.
but then you want to step it down.
Right.
Because if I went from really rough to a super fine, I'm never going to take those scratches
Right.
out.
It would
I'm
take you
never going to
forever.
find it out.
Right. Yeah.
So
Right.
that's why I like to have a long progression from taking metal off to the final step.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Makes
So-
a whole lot of sense.
Plain stones, and this is a rough and a fine. So I do rough, then move to fine. You can get excellent results. There's nothing wrong with stones.
Right.
But it's that initial learning curve of holding the angle. So that leads us to the next type.
Right, and these are pull-throughs.
Pull-throughs, I call them fixed angle, fixed stone, whatever. Basically what it is you have 2 sharpening stones. So there's basically 2 of these in there.
Right.
Here. And they're crossed at a certain angle.
And then that blade is going to be
And then you
pulled
pull
through.
the angle,
Right.
you pull the blade through, and that gives you your angle. It's holding the angle.
So basically I just take this and pull it through.
Oh, that's terrible. So what you want to do with these is, again,
Are you criticizing me right here? Oh.
yes, I'd be kicking you under the table.
This, I
if
can
could.
never get these sharp when I use these.
Well, now there's 2 things about that. A is good technique. And the good technique you want is this one actually has a medium and a fine.
Okay.
This one has just 1.
Okay.
So again, I would not say go with one that just has 1.
Okay.
And even 2 is kind of a small number of steps.
So show me what I was doing wrong.
So what you want to do is first off, they've set this angle in here exactly.
Okay.
Ground it. Get it on something to where it's sitting flat.
Okay.
Now you know
And I don't want it,
No.
I need that angle.
you want it perfectly flat.
I see.
And then you want it 90 degrees this way and 90 degrees that way.
So
So
just
you
need
want
to
it
look
perfectly
over.
straight.
And I pull straight
Yep.
back.
And then with this one, just like we were talking about with the line still applies. So this one doesn't have as much as this.
Right.
But if I was going to pull this one through, I would start here, see how it's flat. Now look what the handle's doing
Oh,
to
I see,
keep
I
that
see.
flat edge.
So this has a very minimal rate,
Minimum.
but I still just need
You would still need to come up just a little
a
bit.
tiny bit.
Just imagine that straight line. And also one thing, notice how you're stopping at the tip. You're never
right.
going to sharpen the tip.
So I need to pull all
All the way through. And usually these have, I'll put my finger in. Usually these will have plastic down here, and that's really what it's for, is kind of a stop.
Ah, so then I could possibly switch back over and go to the fine.
Yes, but here's the problem, is going back to the sandpaper. If you
Right.
switch to fine too soon,
Right.
you'll never get a sharp edge.
So how much do I need to pull through?
Till it's sharp. No.
No, I know. That's the worst part of it. That is the
Well, now here's the most important thing I can say to anyone starting out with knives. And that is, can we grab that dull knife shape?
Yes.
I got one. Okay, so we have our dull knife shape.
Okay.
And let's get all the sharp objects away from it. So let's say I'm going to start doing the secondary bevel here. So I'm going to be sharpening in, and it's going to look something like, let me see your pen.
Yep.
As I'm sharpening, so where I've shaded is now no longer metal.
Right.
It's shiny on the sides and it looks great. However, notice the 2 bevels have not met in the center.
Right. Now I have misaligned my.
No, you haven't. No. You're still just sharpening in
Okay.
until you get to where the bevels meet.
Okay.
However, that's microscopically small. It's really hard to
Okay.
see if you still have that flat or if they've met.
Okay.
So now if you're doing this with stones, this method does not really work for pull-throughs because you're doing it both at the same time.
Right.
Is if they have not met, you have a flat point. And no matter how much you sharpen that knife with the finer abrasives afterwards,
Right.
if you've not gotten your primary bevels to meet,
Right.
you'll never get it sharp. So to know when you got it sharp, and we'll show this in the demo, is as you're doing one of those sides,
Right.
once they've met, if you do the side a little bit more, it'll actually start to curl over in the opposite direction.
Right.
And you can feel that. It's
Yes.
a burr.
Yeah. It's a burr. Yeah.
And that's why they always say, if you ever heard the expression, always sharpen to the burr.
Right.
If you don't, you could have a flat point and you'll never have a sharp knife.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yes. So while you're doing that with a stone, I would sit here and do one side,
Right.
lift it up and run my fingers
Sure. And you can feel it.
up
Right.
the opposite
right.
side.
Right. Right. And you can literally feel it.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
And that's how you know that your main edge bevels are meeting. And that's when you know I'm done with rough.
Okay.
Because I've shaped it down to where they reach a peak.
Okay.
They meet your point. And then I'll go start going to the fine.
Okay.
Because this is removing metal, this is starting to polish.
Right.
So now that leads us into case number 2.
Okay.
So let's say I have a knife like this one that's very sharp, or
Right.
my carry knife, I bought it blade this year.
Right.
I've had it, it's been my primary use knife every day for 6 months or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I have never had to sharpen the knife.
Right.
Instead, what I do is hone the knife.
Right.
So if you're looking at the edge, depending on your steel, depending on how it's ground, the edge is not actually a solid edge. It's little fingers of metal.
Right.
So the absolute first thing that happens when you're using your knife is those fingers curl over.
Right.
Next is the gross point, the actual point, not the fingers, but where it's actually metal meeting metal, will actually start to curl to one side.
Okay.
And that's when you can actually feel that.
Right, right.
Now, if you keep using the knife at that point, you will dull the knife.
And you'll have to start over
And
again.
you have to start over from a rough shape.
Right.
But what you can do is hone the knife instead. And
Okay.
honing is actually straightening that curve and polishing the edges.
Okay.
And there's a couple of different ways you can do that.
Okay.
Really, anything that will straighten that edge and polish it, remove small amounts of metal. So
Okay.
we're going 2 miles an hour at this point.
Right, right.
To get the precise edge.
Right.
Will work. And I love strops. These are a couple that I've made.
Right.
And what strops are,
What strops is? What strops
is basically, and these are pretty much the same thing. It's just leather with a abrasive compound put onto it.
Okay.
And you can actually have, this is a coarse or medium strop, and then this is fine, which is basically metal polish. So at this point, you're literally polishing the edge to get that ultimate sharpness. And such as this one, you have the medium, then you have the ceramic fine. The ceramic fine will do this a little bit, but still I prefer strops.
Right. So I know you're going to show us in the demo how these work.
Yep.
But this is literally straightening up a good edge at
Yes.
this point. Yeah, this is making it sharp again, and if you are keeping your knives in shape and you're not beating the fool out of them,
Yep.
this is what you're going to do more often than this.
And again, my primary carry knife right now have never sharpened it, and it will shave.
Nice.
And it's used for boxes and all that stuff every day, and the only thing I do is I have my pocket strap.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And Jason got both Jason and I one of these.
Yep. And actually, I realized I didn't make this one. I bought this one.
Oh, wow.
I did. And then I kind of did the redesign and made my own because my dad wanted one, then friends
the
wanted
ones you
one.
gave us were nice and curved.
Yep.
It was like this.
Yep. So that's one of the
Fits
ones I
right
did.
inside the Altoids can.
Yep.
It's really, really nice.
Yep.
So what else do we have before we get into demo? Anything? We got through
I think
case
that's
number one and
about
case
it.
number two.
So we've talked about the stones.
Yes.
We've talked about the pull through.
Okay.
There's also powered options.
Yes.
Where you have basically some
That's
size
like I've
of
got a belt grinder
belt
kind
grinder.
of thing, and I've heard about people wrecking knives like that. I've also heard people go, "No, I use mine all the time, and it's perfect."
So you're now in a Maserati,
Exactly.
trying to get to where you want
Well,
to
it's
go.
like I said about our Kershaw factory stuff, right? It is watching somebody who's done it this is their job, this is their
Yes.
profession. Taking a knife that is like this Kershaw and just zipping it across the belt, looking at it, making sure it's perfect, touching it barely, turning it, zipping it the other way, and then shaving it.
It's the difference between a professional race car driver and me getting into the same car.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Again, what's the secret of sharpening? Keeping the angle precise,
Right.
which most of the powered ones you get, unless you just have a belt
Right,
sander,
right.
will have something to
Right.
keep the angle. But then that second part, only removing the metal you actually want to remove.
Right.
You've now gone from a stone where you're going relatively slow, but you still have control over it, to you see
Yeah.
the sparks flying off.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can take away a whole lot more than you needed to.
Yes.
By accident if you're not good at it.
Yes.
Right. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's just another method that's out there.
Yes, and I think that's about it for this section.
Awesome. So we're going to take another little break, and when we get back, we're going to have the whole table set up so that we can actually demo some actual sharpening.
We will sharpen.
Nice. Awesome. We'll be right back with more Guys Talk Knives. And we're back with more Guys Talk Knives. We've got all this stuff on the table, Jason,
Yes.
and we're going to actually do it.
Yes.
So take me through this, because I know this is your system that you brought from
this
home.
is my personal system.
Okay, so let's talk about it.
So this is a wicked edge, and what it does is basically hold the knife in place with the clamp,
Right?
and then it holds the angle for each one of these. So this is its own little set, is 2 stones,
Right?
and it holds the angle as I'm sharpening the knife.
Which we know is the most important part of this entire process.
One of the 2 most important.
Now, this is a pretty awesome little system
Yep.
right here.
This is the Cadillac.
Okay, but in principle, like this Lansky is similar, right? In principle, it's the same thing.
It's the Ford.
Yeah, it is the Ford. And I actually own this one.
Yep.
And it does work on the same principle. I don't get to two-hand it like the other one. I get the one hand, but it's basically holding the angle And
While
I'm
holding
using
the knife.
Holding the knife.
And holding the angle.
Exactly.
And not only that, this process that I'm going to do, all this is doing is holding your angle.
Right.
You could do the exact same process that we're doing here using loose stones.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's where I got with the stones that I was using.
Yep.
Awesome.
So, procedure you want to do.
Okay.
First off, I want to get a marker. This is just a marker. And draw a line on the blade.
Okay.
And the reason I'm doing this is I have my rough abrasive, and I want to do a couple passes on each side. And what I'm doing here is looking at the size of the bevel. So how much shiny metal is covered, and if I look on both sides,
right,
this side's bigger.
Okay.
And I like the amount that is on this side.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is lower the angle on this side just a little bit. And this could be because of how the knife is clamped in. It could be because of how the knife was ground at the factory.
Right.
Could be whatever. But what I'm looking for is...
You're trying to get that to even up.
The bevel to even up.
Right. And meet.
Yep.
Nice.
And now this looks good. Okay. I have my bevel angles the way I want them.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is pick one side.
Right.
And notice on the rough abrasive, the rough stone,
you're going back and forth.
I'm going back and forth because I'm not really worried about it hurting the stone.
Okay.
And I'll do some on the other side. And what I'm doing here is, like we talked about earlier, the most important thing when you're putting in the new angle is getting it to where you have the burr.
Okay.
And I've got a burr.
Okay. Nice.
I've got...
After that, very little, but that's because that is so coarse.
It's so coarse, but here's the fun thing. I don't have a burr along the whole edge.
Ah.
So I have a burr right here.
Right.
I do not have a burr right here.
Right.
And I have a burr right here towards the tip. So I have two zones that have not been done.
Right.
And here's the fun thing. If I wasn't checking on the burr, and I was just looking at it going, oh yeah, that looks great.
Right.
And I went to sharpen it, no matter how much I sharpen it with the finer abrasives, dull spot.
Right.
Yeah. So what I want to do...
So we have to go back and make the burr in the section that you missed.
Yep.
Nice.
Well, I didn't miss it. Come on. So what I'm going to do, go back, and I'm kind of concentrating on those areas where I did not get the burr. That's good on that side. And that's good. If you want to feel, if you reach over to this side, feel that burr?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feels like a little hair or a little wiggle as you come up across the blade. I know a lot of people use the back of their thumbnail.
Yep.
And you can feel it almost flick as you go across it.
And here's a big safety point, as I found out with 3 stitches on one of my fingers. This is a no-fly zone. And I really like that when you did it, you came around and came up from the bottom. This is a danger zone.
Yes.
Don't get in there or you will get cut.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So what I'm going to do now is we've gotten our edge bevel shaped.
Okay.
And this is the exact same thing I would do if I'm using loose stones, if I'm using the wicked edge, or if I'm using the Lansky. I'm just going to start working down from the coarse to the fine. Okay.
And you'll just go through all these steps, and you'll check the burr at each...
Nope.
No.
I only check the burr at the most coarses. Ah. Because as you're going down through the other abrasives, you're not so much removing more metal as you're removing the scratches and polishing the edges.
So as long as I get that burr right
on the
first
most abrasive.
step, on the most abrasive.
And you don't go crazy with any of the stones later on.
Okay.
As long as you have that burr, you have it shaped to where they're touching.
Right.
And you're basically just not removing as much metal, going back to the car metaphor.
Right, no, that makes sense.
That
absolutely makes sense.
You're slowing down
that
to
makes
get that
absolute sense.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
So let's get at it.
Let's do that. So now I've done the 100. I just flip over. If I was using the Lansky, I'd go to the next stone.
Right.
And again, coarse abrasive. And as you're doing this, and I don't think you're going to be able to see this very well. Right. As you're doing this, you'll see very big scratches.
Right.
And then it'll start coming in as smaller scratches.
Right.
And as soon as you see the smaller scratches, you can move to the next abrasive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're just basically removing the scratches you just made and making new scratches.
Mm-hmm. And either with the Lansky or one of these, you can do what I'm doing, going back and forth, or you can just do a smooth stroke down. Although one thing I did with this is actually my SE6 I had in place.
Uh-huh.
I was doing this and I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, and all of a sudden my hand stuck.
Oy.
I didn't feel anything. Just
Right.
it was like somebody was holding my hand. The tip of the SE6 went through my thumbnail, was holding my hand in place to where I literally could not move my hand away. And then
Wow.
when I finally looked down and went, oh, and went out and brought it around.
Right.
One
And then
little,
the blood came.
yeah, one little drop of blood, and that
Wow.
was it. It literally just hung up on my fingernail. But that taught me from then on, whatever system you're using, come down, out, and back.
There you go.
Yeah. And we're good. Now, one thing I'll do, usually, especially once we get down towards the further end, I'll do high quality H2O.
Yes.
Just a paper towel. Get it a little bit wet. You don't want it super wet. But what you're doing is wiping off the abrasive and the dust.
Right.
And what you'll see is
Hold it right up next to the blade.
something like that. So I can
Right,
start
right.
seeing the metal shaving plus the abrasive coming off. And as I progress through the different abrasives, that should get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Okay.
So now I went 100, 200 grit, now 400. And again, all I'm kind of looking for is those scratches to go away. We'll go to 600.
Nice. And I'll say what I said to you while we were talking on the break. It's therapeutic.
Yes.
It becomes this therapy. When I'm working with my loose stones and I'm just sitting there working the blade, it just becomes almost therapy. You're lost in it.
Okay, now you see how I'm testing the edge very
Yes.
carefully. Try that. Even at the low abrasive, if you've
Oh,
gotten
yeah.
that met, it should feel sharp at this
Right,
point.
yeah.
And here's kind of a funny trick that I learned, and I can't remember who told me this. If I knew this was going to be a kitchen knife, mainly for meat,
Right?
because we know serrated is better for meat versus
Sure.
a very fine
You would
edge,
leave it there.
I would stop.
Yeah.
Go to maybe 400, 600 grit, and
Because
then
you
just
don't
stop.
need that fine of an edge.
It's actually rougher. That'll help rip the meat a little bit better.
Huh.
And one thing here, and you do this on even loose stones as well. If you imagine I'm starting here, think about the time each part of the blade
Right.
is seeing the stone. You'll see me start here at the very end and just do this a little bit.
Right.
And that's to make sure this little bit right
Yes,
here.
I miss that
I
part
get it.
every time on the stone. It's
Yep.
harder on a loose stone to get that to come all the way through.
You almost, with a loose stone, I would almost take the knife and just go back and forth.
Okay.
Because that way you're just hitting that one little spot.
Okay.
And I think we're good at 600. And again, I'll give it a little wipe.
Melina's going to be very happy that this
And
is
so you're
sharp.
getting
Oh, yeah.
still more.
Yeah.
Go to the next set. And kind of like we were talking about earlier, if I went from the 100 grit and then tried using my finest on it,
Right.
I would not get as
yeah.
good of an edge.
Right. It's just going to take you forever to get there.
Yeah, and even with the Wicked Edge, it did not come with all these stones.
Right.
I did say, I know I want to do this a little bit more steps.
And that's what's nice about the Lansky set as well. I can
You can
add
order-
whatever I want
Yep,
to it.
yep.
I can go diamond, I can go true stone. I think they actually have whetstones that I can use for that system as well in that.
And
I
if
think
you-
Smith's makes another good system that's like that as well.
I've not seen Smith's.
Smith's comes actually in a nylon bag. We sell that one downstairs.
I'll have to take a look.
Yeah.
And again, what I'm doing is just keep going through the grits. And even at this level, I'm still on a stone.
Yes.
So therefore, I'm still doing the back and forth. The next abrasive that we're going to is actually ceramic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to go down on that, because if you go this way, you're cutting the edge into the ceramic.
Right.
You can actually chip your ceramic.
Ah.
Yeah, so you want to watch that. It's looking nice.
Yes.
And again, just give it a little feel. And you can see I have
Uh-huh.
stuff on
Yeah,
my hand.
the stone is even so much worse than that. Like, if I were to drag my finger down your stones here.
Oh, the rough ones especially,
Yeah.
And the other reason is, once I get towards my fine stones, I don't want that
Oh,
the dust
absolutely. Right.
on there.
Right.
Okay, so now we're moving to ceramic. Just make sure I get the right side first. You want to always start the coarser side.
Sure.
As you're moving through these. Now here, so I'm being a little bit more careful about my strokes. And another way you know as you're going through each one of these, and even if you're doing loose stones, is when you first start off, you're obviously removing a lot of metal.
Right.
Therefore, there's going to be a lot of resistance to when you do it. So you can almost get to the point where you feel when you're done with the stone.
You can hear it too.
Mm-hmm. And you see this is getting a good bit shinier.
Yep.
Switch.
You know, they stopped making this leak version of the leak because they couldn't get it perfect on every knife, because it was a process that happened by accident for it to become that rainbow iridescent color.
Really?
But it couldn't meet Kershaw's quality standards, so they couldn't
For
do
consistency.
it. Right. So while they said they could have sold it every day of the week over and over and over again to anybody because everybody wanted it, they just couldn't get it to be consistent enough to be a Kershaw product.
Right. And now, it did feel sharp earlier. Feel it now that we've gone down to the ceramics.
Oh yeah.
I can hear that.
Yeah.
And now we'll go the final little step.
Nice.
And these are the really fine ones. And okay, so look at the blade, or look at the edge.
Okay.
Now watch this. And I'll do the other side so the camera can see it a little bit.
Wow, it's getting shiny.
You get to a mirror.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah, and some of mine you can actually. I had a Smoky Mountain sticker.
Yeah.
And I put the knife down on it. You could see the lettering of the sticker reflected back up in the edge. And again, this system holds the blade for you. It holds the angle of the stone for you, just like the Lansky would.
Right.
But the exact same thing you're doing here, it just makes it easier to do it repeatedly.
Right.
Versus
you're only going to
stone.
get one on this system. I will say this: get the tabletop mount for this Lansky. It makes it 1,000 times easier.
Yes.
It really, really does.
Okay. And I am going to go ahead and wipe in between these two. And see here, a lot less. Almost nothing. Now we'll go to the fine.
And the noise is completely different.
Even between these two.
Right.
And you see that
Oh yeah.
getting to a mirror.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I can see my hand.
Melina's going to be impressed. She'll probably cut herself by the end of the day.
Well, and that's the thing is, like we were talking about, the very first was it's safer to have a blade that's very sharp because you don't have to do the force into the cut. But the bad thing is that if you do accidentally cut yourself.
And I think it's funny. I think we maybe need to mention this too, because you have done it every time you've handed me one of your knives. This is very sharp. You say it every time. This is very sharp.
Yeah, I've gotten into the habit because people
are not used to sharp knives. They're just really not.
That's very unfortunate.
Right, it is. And it's what I've told the story here on this show for a long time, that my dad carried the Stockman around that was an old timer, a Schrade forever, and it was so dull, it was ridiculous. I cannot believe that happened twice
in one day.
taping.
Yeah.
I know. Right, but I gave him a brand new case knife, and the first thing he did was cut himself with it because
And one
he
thing
was
here,
not used to hashing.
I did have tape
Uh-huh.
over the main part of the blade just to keep dust out, and you can actually see the tip of the tape right there.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, I did it on one knife, and I never did it past then. Okay, so try that.
Wow, totally sharp at this point.
So again, the whole progression, get your coarse
Right.
Get the bevels on both sides, which you can use the marker trick even with if you're doing
Right.
stone, so you can see where you're hitting.
Right.
You just have to be very consistent past that.
Right.
And once you have your bevels right, bring them together until you get the burr.
Right.
Clean the burr off, and then just progress down to as fine as you have abrasives, and you're done.
So the one thing that I think I've done wrong using this kind of system was continuously checking for that burr.
No.
Yeah,
Pretty much,
that's great to know.
I
That
checked
is a
for it
great
for the first.
tip.
Yeah.
That's a great tip. That's a great tip to know because it would concern me that I wasn't getting that burr, and then I was probably taking off too much material at that point.
Yeah.
And instead of really paying attention to the scratches like I should have.
Because if you also think of it, how much you're having to affect that metal
Yeah, to feel
actually get it to curl
Yes.
over,
Yes,
you're
yes.
not going to do that once you get into the final.
Right. So let's quickly talk about.
Yep.
Let's say I've had this out for a while. It's sharp.
Yep.
It's nice. I need to strop it. I need to.
Yep.
I need to do that. Let's talk about that.
So here's an excellent example.
Okay.
Because stropping this one would probably actually
Dull it
a little
at
bit.
this point.
That's the funny
That's a
thing.
good point.
That's the funny thing.
Yeah.
This is my personal carry.
Uh-huh.
I picked this up at the Blade Show this year.
Okay.
They just came out with it and braided my own wave.
Nice.
But I have not sharpened this knife at all.
Okay.
And this has been, if I'm carrying a knife, this is probably what's
Okay.
in my pocket since Blade Show.
Okay.
I've used it opening boxes, cutting up boxes, etc., and it will still shave. So how does that happen if you're not sharpening it? You hone it.
Right.
And like we talked about with the strops, this is my personal one that I carry. To strop, you want to find your angle, just like we did before. So here on the wood, I'm running it down, lifting it up until it bites.
Okay.
So it bites here. I want to keep about that same angle. I'm never going forward.
Right.
And this is, again, one of the worst things you can do. You see people get to the edge and they do this. They swipe up.
Right.
And what that swipe up does is just dull your knife.
Right. So it's keeping level and going all the way across.
Yes. And as far as pressure, you want to apply just enough pressure, almost as if you're trying to smooth icing on a cake.
Okay.
You're not really pushing really hard.
I think
All
that was
wanna
probably
do
the
is-
mistake I made when I first tried your.
And I think you
strop.
said you did this.
I did.
That's
I did,
terrible.
Yeah.
And
I told you I didn't know anything about it, Jason.
I made you a video and sent it later.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was great.
And again, what I'm doing here, I'm not really removing metal. A little bit I am.
Yeah.
But I'm straightening that edge and polishing the edge.
Right.
And that's it. Just those couple of strops. And feel that.
Wow.
And this stays in my pocket most days. And dual use, I had some knives that had curled pretty badly. If you can see the scratches on the bottom of the Altoid stem, I don't know if you can see
It's
that.
just right here. And he'll go to camera too. There you
See
go.
all the scratches on the bottom of the Altoid stem?
Yeah.
That is from taking the burr off of a knife. You literally treat it almost like the strop and press it in and scratch it, and you'll see it start scratching
Wow.
and actually bringing metal off the case. And then as soon as that burr is gone, it smooths out and it feels like you're going on glass.
Wow.
And then all I did was then go back to the strop and put it the rest of the way.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's very, very nice.
So that's basically
That's
how you
the
sharpen.
process.
And whether you're using the Cadillac, the Ford, or loose stones, it's
Right.
all the same thing.
Right, and it's practice.
Practice. Get 4 or 5 Rough Riders and dull it.
Yeah.
So you can try that.
Yeah.
Keep one that has a good edge that comes from the factory, and then just try stropping it and using
Nice.
it. And the best way to figure out if you're doing this is kind of like golf. You get immediate feedback what you're doing.
Sure.
Use the knife. Take it in your kitchen.
Right.
And actually sharpen your kitchen knives and see how you're doing.
That is where I found the angle first. That was I couldn't get it to happen on a pocket knife, and then I found it on kitchen knives. It was how the stroke should be at the angle, and I felt like it was maybe because it was a little bit bigger. I had just an easier time keeping the right move across the whole blade. Now it's a stone, so it was. I'm not pushing as much as I was across it. I'm making a nice pull, a nice pull, a nice pull. A nice pull.
Well, again, that flip, even for me, I'm not the expert at that as far as flipping it and
Right.
doing the opposite side,
Right.
so you're not doing your strong direction.
Right.
But also one thing, maybe your angle was a little bit low, because kitchen knives are usually going to be a little bit
Sure.
finer edge.
Sure.
That could also be.
Sure.
Yeah.
And they're a little softer.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. Most definitely. Jason, I appreciate you coming in and showing us all of this stuff. I hope everybody out there who watches this show got something from it. I know I did personally. This is Guys Talk Knives. If you're not subscribing to this channel, make sure you are. You are clicking the subscribe button. It's right down here. And above Jason's head over there, there's a bell. Ring that bell, make sure it actually comes in. But follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, join the SMKW Army, closer to 95,000 right now. About 94 and a half is where we are at this point, which is kind of crazy that we have that many people on Facebook that are having a great time.
And if you have any sharpening questions, I'll follow the video once it comes out,
Awesome.
at least on Facebook.
Yeah.
Maybe not the other ones, but
Yeah.
at least on Facebook, I'll
Yep.
see if there's any questions. I'll try to give an answer.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
It's been Guys Talk Knives. We'll catch you next time.